My name is Maggie Kang. I've been in the industry for 15 years, all in the story department. I started off as a story trainee, then became a board artist, then a head of story, and now currently I'm directing at Sony Pictures Animation. We know that the actual work of storyboarding, our ultimate goal is to actually create a storyboard, but all the thinking and then the reasons why we actually make the choices that we do make when we actually do the board, I think are so much important. And so I just wanted to concentrate more on that in this talk today. Also, there's just so many other artists besides myself, just even at this amazing expo, like Louis Del Carmen, for example, who is doing a story lecture and a demo, who draws infinitely better than I do, and is so much more experienced than I am. I think that you can learn a lot more about the actual storyboarding from somebody like that than somebody like me. Just to get into my story, just so that you know what my perspective on story is and why that is, it's all defined by the person that I am. So just to give you a little more bio of myself, I was born in Seoul, Korea, and I was raised in Toronto, Canada. I went to Sheridan College, and that's where I met Bobby and Kay. I think Bobby had I think we had 2 years of overlap because he was 2 years ahead of me. So out of school, I was recruited by DreamWorks Animation. I started out as a story trainee in their story training program, became a story artist, and I think the first production I worked on was Over the Hedge. And then I worked on a ton of sequels. And so altogether, I spent 10 years at DreamWorks Animation. But in the middle of that, I was like, I need some more life experience. And I really, from a kid, I just really wanted to live in Manhattan. So I moved to Manhattan, and I got a job at Blue Sky, and I worked there for a year, commuting, doing the hour and 20-minute one-way commute for a year. And after a year, I was like, okay, this is too much. I'm getting out of here. And my rent was $2,000 for a tiny apartment this big. So I went back to DreamWorks, and then I was offered a head of story position at Warner Animation Group on the Lego Ninjago movie. So I went and did that. Oh, you guys have seen it. Honestly, I haven't seen it myself. But that's a different story that we can talk about over drinks at the bar, because that was quite an experience. But it was a great experience because I got to work with Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who are, just to be in a story room with them and just to get their ideas is such an honor. And they're probably two of the most smartest people in our industry. So after I did that head of story job, I was just like, man, I've been working in the industry for 14 years. I really just want to work on my own stuff. So, before that, when I was a head of story, I just wanted to tell everybody, and I know there's a lot of young people in this room, but I had a kid while I was a head of story at a major studio working on a major production. And then I took 3 months off, and then I went back and I finished my position. So for anybody who is thinking they can't have a kid, especially women, because I know that that's a big thing in our industry. We don't see a lot of supervisors and directors who have children. It can be done. I did it, and I know a few other women who have done it. So you can have a kid and still have a career. So I was like, oh man, screw this. I don't want to work on other people's stuff. I want to make my own stuff. So I took about a year to concentrate on developing my own ideas. And so together with my partner and husband, some of you may know his name is Rad Seacrest. So yes, that is the choice I made. So he and I came up through DreamWorks, and that's where we met. And he is at DreamWorks right now, currently finishing off his Kipo series that's coming out in January. So he and we work really well together, and at home, because this is kind of our bread and butter, this is kind of mostly what we talk about. We either talk about animation or our kid. And so the two of us, we're always just developing stuff, just constantly. And so we sold two original TV projects to DreamWorks TV. And together we came up with this feature that we sold to Sony Animation, and I will be directing it. He's off doing his own stuff. Like we should never work together because we are just two very headstrong personalities with really strong points of view. So we like to have like one person take the lead on stuff. So the reason I got into animation is because I actually come from more of a storytelling background. I always drew and stuff as a kid, but I drew because I was always coming up with characters. So like, I would always like come up with a character and just either write a story for that character and then do illustrations for it. Or, we had like a video camera at home. So I would like create these characters and act them out in commercials and stuff. So like, I never like really sat down and just drew for fun. And that's really why I don't have a social media presence, because I don't really do that. Like that's not something I do. And, I've come to a point in my career where I'm like, I'm okay to say that now, And another huge influence on me was my dad. My dad is a huge film buff. He has like a collection of like 3,000 or 4,000 like foreign films. And so growing up, like when families were watching like the National Lampoon Christmas Vacation during the holidays, at home, like we were watching like all of the Chaplin films, or like The Hidden Fortress, or like Seven Samurai, and like Citizen Kane. Like I think I watched Citizen Kane when I was like 8 years old, and I was like, oh, that's a good movie, And so like that influence carried through college, and so like in college I watched a lot of foreign films, just really about like slice of life stuff. And so that's kind of like where I gravitate towards too. And that's my hook in story. And I just love, like all those movies don't really follow that classic like story structure, save the cat kind of thing that has kind of become like law in animation. It's more like, moments that are kind of strung together and just put on film. And I love stories where you can just pop in and like follow a character for a certain amount of time, and then you pop back out, and it doesn't matter if you think that the characters are going to be okay, or maybe they're not going to be okay, but the time that you spent with them is what really matters. So yeah, like I just wanted to just pick a topic that I think is kind of the most important topic to think about, like every time you sit down to figure out a scene or a story or like a feature. Or if you're just doing like a tiny character moment. So this talk is going to be about the importance of point of view as it pertains to storyboarding, specifically for feature animation, because that's really the only experience I have. So we'll start from like, how does that relate? How do we use that in an entire story, and go into sequences? And then, if you guys want to, we can do shots. And I could do a little demo thing on the Cintiq there. Okay. So when we talk about point of view, it can mean, probably like two main things. One is it can be the point of the artist themselves, right? So this is usually in the case of like short film. It doesn't really happen, unfortunately, in like mainstream media. Nobody wants to spend like $80 million on one person's political point of view, or just one director's vision. That's just not the way this business works. So this is more common in like short films and independent films. So a good example of this is the short film, Oscar-nominated short film Weekends, created by Trevor Jimenez, which is just like a short story that, depicts his personal like experiences of growing up in a family that is separate, where the parents are divorced, right? But we're gonna talk about number two, which is point of view, and how it affects like a story. Like how is a story told? So whose perspective are we seeing this story? So once we change the perspective of how a story is told, it really can change everything, right? A really good example of this is Wicked. Wicked is a story told, is the story of The Wizard of Oz, which is a very like universally known story. but it's told through the perspective of the witch, who is the antagonist, the villain of the story. And by telling the story through her eyes, we get a completely different story, one that puts her in the light as a villain and makes her much of an apathetic character. And we understand how and why she became the witch that we famously know her for. So Wicked is a really great example. And probably for me, the best example of how a story can be told differently through different POVs is Kurosawa's Rashomon. If you haven't seen it, please go see it, or please go see any Kurosawa movie, because he is the king of storytelling. You can pick up any of his movies that is made in like the 50s and pop it in, and it's black and white, and you're like, oh great, I have to watch a black and white movie. But once you actually sit there and absorb it, you're like, wow, the storytelling is so modern. And then you realize like all the cool movies that you see in the theaters now are like, oh, they just ripped him off. It's really crazy. And he's done like, I don't know how many, he's done like 30 films or something. It's crazy. And he like storyboards them himself, plans all the shots. It's pretty insane. So please go see any Kurosawa movie and study them. And if you haven't seen Rashomon, it's a story about a murder of a samurai, and they hold court to find out what happened. And so we get 4 different perspectives of the story told through 4 different people. And it's a great movie that shows you these characters are trying to prove their innocence and prove other people wrong. And so their version of the story just puts them in this good light. And it's really cool to see how one incident that happened can be told completely differently through through the eyes of 4 different people. So it's really great. You guys should check it out. It's a great example of how when you change the point of view, you change everything. You can change the tone of the story. You can change the genre of the story. It can change how you understand a character or any situation. It really changes everything. So when we talk about story, there's really 7 types of stories that we can tell. And I don't know if you guys know this. You could just Google it. This is Overcoming the Monster, Rags to Riches, The Quest, A Voyage and Return, Comedy, Tragedy, and Rebirth. There's only a finite number of emotional stories you can tell as well with the main character. And the only things that make stories different are who the character is, where the story takes place, and when the story takes place. So you could have you could have a story like Alice in Wonderland or Aladdin. Those are stories that we all know, but the reason why they keep getting retold again is because every time a different director or a different writer takes their approach, it becomes a completely different story. So the only variable is you, the filmmaker. And so there's a reason why I spent so much time talking about myself at the beginning of this thing. It's because the person I am, and then the life experiences that I bring to the table and that I have gained over the years, my love for slice of life movies, all the movies that I watched growing up, these things are what helped me define me as an artist, and it shapes my point of view when I approach any scene or any story that I'm creating. So I think it's really important when you're storyboarding or telling a story that it's really important to just be yourself and put in those moments that you don't think are really big, but they actually turn out to be really impactful when somebody else sees them. And it's really the only way that we can make something individually ours. And so if you when we create something that we're just forcing out of ourselves, it just feels fake and not genuine. It's when we dig deep and add a personal touch to this scene that it resonates with people. And I think the most successful moments in film are those that come from the heart. And that's the reason why the movie Farewell is doing so well at the box office and with critics, is because it's a personal story. And she's literally putting her heart, in front of us. And we can feel that. So for me, one of the best moments in My Neighbor Totoro is when May, the younger sister, is like coming home all excited, and she wants to tell like Satsuki something. And she's like running up these little steps. There's like 3 or 4 steps to this house, right? And she's running up and she's like yelling out stuff, and she's like kicking her feet to get the shoes off her feet. And, you know, this is such a small moment, like small character moment, that Miyazaki probably just observed a kid do once and just threw in there. But for me, it's a moment that takes me back to my own childhood, because that's the type of house that I grew up in Seoul. And I remember doing that as a kid. I would come home excited, and I knew like, okay, well, I'm so excited to get up there and tell my mom this thing that my friends and I did, but I know that I can't wear shoes in the house, so like I have to obey the rules. And you know, there's just so much that's going on in your head. And every time I see that scene, it just takes me back to like that moment. And I can see like my mom cooking in the kitchen, like the smell of the food, my sister sitting in the corner, and just the house that I grew up in like years and years ago. It's so cool that this one little moment that Miyazaki observed and put into this movie has this ability to transport a person like me to all these great personal memories. And I think that's like super cool, right? Like we have so much power as storytellers to be able to do that. And, you know, like, and that's kind of the reason why Pixar movies are so successful, because they're able to like take one moment in their movies and just transport you to like a moment in your life that you can relate to, and then you can relate to the character and love the character even more. So, you know, in that moment, we get Miyazaki's point of view of who this character is, but we also get a perspective, a point of view of like who Mei is. Like she's a little girl. Everything in her environment must feel so gigantic to her. And so the fact that she has to like climb up these measly 2-3 steps to get up into the living room, like that tells a lot about who this character is, which leads us to the most important point of view in any story, which is the point of view of the character. Everything goes back to character. Everything in the movie, like music, layout, art, colors, everything points to character. It's the reason why we watch movies. It's the reason why we feel in movies, and it's the reason why we remember movies. So if you have like, even when you have like a super wide shot where like it's just an apocalyptic, crazy, chaotic ruin, you know, bombs are going off everywhere and things are just, you know, it's dark and you know, and gloomy, and there's rain and thunder and snow. And if you see a scene like that in the movie theater, you're immediately like, oh crap, I'm just programmed to think that this is dangerous. Like this is not cool. I don't feel easy, right? I feel very uneasy being here. But if the next shot is the character's face, and the character is like really determined or really happy, then we immediately forget that feeling that we felt in the previous shot. And we think, oh, okay, I'm supposed to feel what this character is feeling. And I no longer feel uneasy, and I actually feel safe and excited and exhilarated. Why? That's the moment where you want to like learn more, right? You want to learn more about the character. You want to know about why this character is in this background. And, you know, the opposite, if we show a character that is nervous, sad, or crying, then it just makes that previous shot of chaos even more like it just reinforces the thoughts that we had from the beginning. We're like, oh my gosh, yes, I am supposed to feel this way. What's going on? I need to get out of here. There's like a sense of panic that builds up. So it's amazing how much power one single face and one single expression has. And that's why like sometimes when I'm storyboarding, it takes me like 20 tries to like just get one expression right, because sometimes the one expression can really make or break that moment. And if you don't nail that one expression, like for me, it's just like a challenge. I'm just like, oh, I know that this is the face I need to draw, but you know, the eyebrows are not right, or the pupil, something like I just can't make that perfect mouth shape that's gonna put like, that's gonna be worth like 10 drawings in one. So like a lot of times I would spend like an hour on one face. And you're like, wow, geez, like have I been spending this time on this one thing? And then it still isn't right. So I'll have to I just drop it. I go do something else and then I come back to it. Like a lot of times I've done that because it really is that important sometimes, that one single expression. And it's really weird that, when we see a face make an expression, we automatically feel that expression. And it's hard not to make that expression ourselves. And I think it's totally like an instinctual thing because I have a daughter who's 2 years old. And this one time she did something really sweet and it was like such a mom moment. And I was like so happy. And I was just so amazed and had all this love for her in that moment. And so I just started crying. And she was like, Mommy, you crying? And I was like, yes, I'm crying. And she was like, you sad? And I was like, no, I'm crying because I'm happy. And then, but for her, like that's too like complicated of an emotion, right? Like crying means sad to Rumi. So she's like, oh, Mommy's sad. I'm like, no, Mommy's crying because she's happy. And then I just can't stop crying. And so she starts crying, but she's like, ah! Like she's bawling her eyes out. And I'm just like, no, I'm happy. And, and it happens all the time. Like, I hate to admit it, but I've cried a few times with her. But, and every time I have to really control myself because I put her in that emotional state. And I feel awful as a parent, but I think it's just an instinctual thing that even a 2-year-old does. Now I'm just gonna get into like my process a bit. So when I approach like boarding a scene, when I first get launched on something, the first things I figure out are what defines are the first few thoughts and the decisions I make are really what defines the entire board. So if my first instincts and judgments are wrong from the get-go, I usually have to go back and start over because those few initial thoughts are that important. The moment before you actually start boarding is like determines all the choices that you're going to make, right? From like the first shot that you see, the shot that you decide is going to be the shot where you show the character. And, maybe the last shot you see the character, the first shot of the scene or, the last shot of the scene. The first questions I think about when I start boarding a scene before I board a scene, where I'm actually just in thumbnail phase and I spent 2 days thumbnailing, thinking, and having coffee, is what is the character feeling in this scene? Where is this character at emotionally in this scene? And where does this scene land in the emotional arc of the character's journey in the entire movie or TV show? It can be really in anything, short story. So once I decide my answers on these questions, the next ones that I ask are, okay, so now that I know this, or I think I know this, or at least I've decided that these are the answers to these questions, I ask myself, how do I show this in the best way possible so that the person who is watching this can feel exactly what this character is feeling in this moment? What shots would be the best shots to show these emotions? And what are the expressions that the character needs to make, or the words that they need to speak, if any, to express these emotions? So there are times when I really don't know where to begin, because sometimes you get a scene and you're like, I really don't like this scene, or I can't relate to this character in this scene, or you just think this scene is wrong or badly written. It happens a lot. So when I first get a scene I don't really know how to approach, I think about some sort of emotional hook, or, it could be a joke or like a gag, or even like a little character moment that the character has themselves or with another character. Something that puts me in the character's shoes, and then I just go from there. So an example of this is I did a little freelance last year and worked on Croods 2. And I got a scene that highlighted one of the new characters in the sequel. And she's a character that's been living in isolation, and the only like human interaction she's had is just with her parents. And so she meets Eep, the character played by Emma Stone. And Eep is just showing her like, oh, like I've been on all these adventures, like look at all the scars that I have from all these adventures. And I just boarded the scene very straightforward at first, and then I realized, like we need to, and the assignment was really to be like, okay, we really need to learn more about this character. Like, can we figure out like some stuff, like some like meaty stuff about this character? And so I had her, when Eep's showing her scars and stuff, I had her like grab her arm and like hold it and like wrap her arms around it and be like have her face like in the scar and talk to Eep, and kind of like, I guess, treated her more like a Tarzan character, somebody who doesn't know like the boundaries of personal space because she's never been with, around new people ever. And so when I did that, I realized, oh, okay, so like, this is fun. Like, this is a cool character. And then I just went back to like, from the beginning, just try to figure out moments where I could add more of that or like expand on that. And these little gem moments are what like really get me excited when I board, because these gems are what builds a character in my mind and help me get into the character's head. And then I can approach the scene I'm working on or any other scene from their point of view. It helps me like find out what they'll do or how they'll do something and what they'll say. With that said, sometimes you'll get a scene where you have like no idea how our character feels. And one of our many jobs we have as story artists is actor, right? Like how an actor plays a character. We too must play a character in order to express what a character feels. I try to come up with like an example of this. And the only thing that I could think about was on Shrek 4. I was asked to board the scene where like Shrek and Fiona first like kiss for the first time. And if you guys haven't seen the movie, Shrek is like thrown into an alternate universe where he doesn't know his wife or his children, and he has to like win his wife back. So I was asked to board the scene like by Mike Mitchell, the director, and he's like, okay, so I want this to be super romantic. Shrek's like, he's super romantic with her, and he like goes up and he like puts his arms around her back and like puts her hand like there, and they're like, it's super sweet. And I'm just looking at him like, Mike, I'm a single girl. I haven't had a boyfriend in ages. Like, I'm probably not the right person to board the scene. And I was like, why don't you just get somebody who's like in love and happy to board this? Like, Joel Crawford has like 3 children. He's happily married. Like, I think Joel could do a great job. And he's like, no, I want you to do this. And I'm like yelling at him like, like, I can't do that scene. And he's like, yes, you can. And so, that's like, that was just like my bitter single girl thing come in now. But, sometimes you get asked to do scenes like that you don't want to do. And the whole time I'm just like, oh, all right, Shrek's going to do this and put his arms here. But, like I had to like really dig deep and like put all that stuff aside because, it really is a job. Like you have to put on certain hats that you don't want to put on sometimes. And so I boarded the crap out of that scene and I put myself in Shrek and Fiona's shoes, and I had like a rotating camera and like, leaves just circling them and, little debris and stuff. And he was like, see, I told you could do it. And I was like, ugh. So, and they loved it. But yeah, it's really a job. So, really our job is to have a point of view and then and then use that to show the character's point of view. But then in a big production or a big movie, it's really the director's point of view. So there's a lot of point of view, like inceptions going on there. But, you know, you really have to stay true to yourself and bring what you bring to the table, because that's really why they hired you, right? But with that said, there are times when you need to really just put your point of view on the side, especially when you're working on a big production like a feature film. You know, because, you know, this is something that I think a lot of people are not told, I think. And I've worked with some people who really don't follow this rule. And it's, you know, it does get pretty frustrating when you are a supervisor or a director, because, you know, as a board artist, you're not always like, bless you, you don't always know what's going on. Like, a movie has so many moving pieces. The scene that you're working on can be completely changed by the time like you finish it. And, you know, it's hard as a leader to, like a head of story or a director, to tell you like, oh, no, we're not gonna do that anymore. You know, it's just really hard to do that. And so like, but it's also, because there are so many moving pieces, it's really hard to like keep the entire crew updated on everything that's going on. So I find that, you know, the best thing that you can do is think about yourself as somebody who supports a director's vision and the production's vision. And so when you're working on a production, you really have to be working on a production. It's not your own movie. You have to, you know, there's a place for your vision, and then there's really, you know, there's a time for your vision, and then a time where you really just have to do the production work. And you have to understand that there's not always a place for you to just go off and do your own thing and like offer your perspective on stuff. So like, unless you're like coming in at a development time where you're like asked to develop a character or, you know, do some work to like establish a character, it's really important that you just do your assignments and give people what they need for the editorial cut. So does anybody have any questions? Yes.
The gems you were talking about, how you discover those and you draw them out and emphasize them at different parts of the story. Is there a way when you're doing the quote job to work that in, or is that something that happens very early in the production process only?
It depends. I think, you know, it definitely doesn't really happen, I would say like maybe a year into story process. I mean, it depends though. It depends on how big the moment is and how like I guess as long as those moments are adding to the character and we discover more layers about the character that don't like undermine or take away from the characteristics that have been established already. Something that pluses it, you know, can be little gems too. But I mean, I would say just try it out and see if it works. And if it works for the scene, it works for the scene. As long as like the character becomes a different character, you know, I would say.
It's kind of a balance and a risk if you insert your own voice when that may be aligning with the director's vision, you know.
Sometimes like I like to be straightforward and tell the director like, I was thinking about this and present it in that way. And sometimes I just want to surprise them, you know, but it also depends on your relationship with the director and who the director is. But, you know, I'm not trying to tell people to like hold back on your ideas. Please be free to like show your ideas. But, you know, what I was saying at the end there is, don't present huge ideas that change the character drastically later in production, because they're just going to get cut, you know? And I think as story artists, I came up in a time where I don't really know if this is like the saying now, but we just say like, we know that 99% of what we do will just end up in the bin. And so we really have no pride in anything. You know, my job is to just offer as many ideas as I can. And if one of them sticks, then you're like, great. Like I went to a screening once and we're walking to the screening room and one of the artists said, oh, I can't wait to see my drawing. And he literally had one drawing in the entire screening, you know, but it doesn't mean that he didn't contribute to everything, you know? So yeah, I would just say pick your moments and just be bold, but not too bold. Yeah. Any other questions? Hi. Yes.
Okay, so I actually wanted to ask, do you do any research pre-production or during boarding where if you don't quite connect with the character or you just can't relate with them?
A lot of times, the director will kind of give you like, okay, so this character is like this person, like, I don't know, like Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec. So you have something to kind of grasp onto. So I find that from my experience, a lot of directors do that. Like they give you some character references. I do research. Like I try to just, it's hard, like, because you're working all the time, but it's weird. Like we also have to just be on top of like all these TV shows now where like, you know, people tell you like, oh, you know, I want it based on this. And you're like, okay, well, I haven't seen that. And you can't really get a sense of a character like fully in like one episode. So you have to like sit there and actually, so I have done that where I watch like movies or TV shows to like reference stuff. But, you know, I try to find references within my own library of stuff that I think could be related to the character or the moment, and try to add those in because it's just stronger, you know. So that's what I try to do. Yes.
I know that like every story artist is a little bit different. You spend like 2 days thumbnail. What is your thumbnailing process?
So when I sit down and thumbnail, I try to get the entire thing down, like no matter how big it is, just in one thought. I literally do I do very small thumbnails where I have like a character and I just do a circle and then I do eyebrows and dots for eyes, like, and then maybe a grid. That's really how I do it. And some people don't do that. Some people just go straight ahead, even in action sequences, which I think is insane. But for me, like planning is so important because I don't want to like go down a path where I'm throwing away a lot of my work. I'd rather just spend time doing it well the first time. So, and then what I try to do is, and I've told a few of my friends this who are like storyboarding, I do thumbnails like vertically this way so that the point of view of the viewer is always kind of aligned. So even when like I swap to the next character, I won't put them like totally on this other side because you don't want the viewer's eye to just be like this, like bouncing back and forth on the screen. And that's especially useful when you're doing like an action scene because at the cut, you just want the viewer's eye to just be right where you left it in the last shot. So that's like a good tip that one of the board artists gave me like years and years ago. Yes.
Yeah, so I also like doing slice of life
Mm-hmm.
boards. I like capturing emotions that are like subtle but specific.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do when you're working on a scene or a shot that has like those little specific moments, but it doesn't convey the emotion correctly? Like you show it to coworkers or the director, and they don't get the feeling that you're trying to convey. How do you go from there?
So what I do is like I love doing acting stuff. Like that's just my like that's just my jam. I love doing it, and I love eyebrows. I just crazy for eyebrows and under lids. Oh, you know, it's just I live for that. So when I board something like that, especially like an emotional scene, are you talking about specifically like an emotional scene, or it just doesn't really matter? Anyway, so whatever emotion it is, happy or sad or elated or excited or whatever, I put myself in that character's shoes, and I do the expressions and I go through the emotions, And I think one drawing that most people forget to do is, even when you're like, if you tell me something and I go like, oh, I understand. And then I think, and then, oh, I think about this. I think of this idea before I look at you to tell you. So just those two drawings of like, okay, I'm thinking, or I process, I think about something, and then I look at you, and then I tell you. Like, I try to do all those drawings so that you're like really processing emotion and information with the character. Because you just want the viewer to just like just feel every single nuance that the character is feeling. And so I think that would be a good exercise for you, is to just try to do as many as you can and see which ones you can take out, you know? But usually, like, that's kind of like, those are one of the things I kind of don't see in a lot of portfolios, is that in-between drawing of somebody either processing or thinking before they act. And that one drawing is like so important, you know, and it tells you like this person really understands like what storyboarding is, because the reason why we do this is to have people feel, right? So that's kind of an exercise that I think you should try. Cool. Yes.
When it comes to like the whole process, what part of the pipeline, like from like thumbnailing to like finally boarding, do you feel is one of the most important stages in terms of like getting out like what you need out of that scene?
Before you board is kind of, you know, I think figuring out what moment, because in any scene, there's only so much you can do. A scene is no more than like, you know, roughly about 3 minutes of screen time. If it's longer than that, it just feels long. And, you know, and this is something that's kind of hard to tell when you're just in storyboarding. But when you're in an editorial room, you're just like, oh my gosh, that scene is way too long and it feels really long. And you don't feel that when you're pitching it, but when it's like cut and in front of you with music and everything, it can feel completely different. So that's kind of a rule of thumb. It's like 2 to 3 minutes is a really good, solid piece. And that's anywhere from like 100 to like 300 drawings if you're doing like some action in it. But 100 to 200 drawings is kind of like your aim for like a good sequence. But it's so like, there's only a few really meaty moments that you can like create in that little amount of time. And so for me, I try to just pick one big one where I'm like, oh, this is what the scene is about. Like, this scene is about this person telling this person this, or this person reacting to something that this person is saying to this person. And so I'll make like a meal out of that. And sometimes I'll even start there. You know, I'll start boarding that scene and then build everything around it. But, you know, you don't really have time for like 3 huge moments, you know, usually. So like I would decide on what those moments are first and then wrap everything around it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what works for your type of your study? Like what kind of things do you look for when you're watching?
When I'm watching something?
Yeah, when you're analyzing.
Oh, analyzing? You know, it's actually interesting because I'm like, for a lot of years, I wasn't able to like just enjoy a movie. But now I'm like the most gullible person. And my husband is not. He's like, oh, this is the bad guy. And I'm like, oh my God, really? And he's always right. And I hate that he does that because it just ruins the movie for me. But I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe this is the bad guy. Like, I'm so shocked. So like, I've been able to like detach myself from like the observing thing. But I think the things that like hit me most when I watch stuff is just, I don't know, just, I love like, I just love like character on character comedy, you know, just things that, I hate the word like jokes or gag pass because I just think they're, you know, that's just filler. And I just love like, I love watching moments between characters that only those two characters can have, I guess. And I think the success of a movie is if you can create those moments, you know? And if you can create characters that you can pop in anywhere and you just know like what kind of conversation they would have or like what they would do in the situation. You just know because you just know those characters. I actually don't watch a lot of movies these days because my child is crazy. But I guess one of the things I really loved was like Fleabag. That's probably a recent thing I loved. And I loved the play of like just the whole like looking and talking to camera. So I think, and I love Succession. I just recently started that. So I don't know. I just love character stuff. And I love seeing how different characters just interact with each other. I think that's why we watch movies. And, you know, I'm always trying to figure out like who characters are. Like even this movie I'm developing right now, like we have roughly of like, okay, we know what this movie's gonna be, but we're still trying to figure out those little gems that's gonna really make these characters memorable. So, you know, I just do a lot of character study, I would say. Yes. Acting? Oh, actually, you know what? I have a very, very old one. I don't know, a lot of recent stuff that I've done. Why did I pick you? This is the, I'm sorry. And it actually kind of like, it really relates to this point of view stuff that I've been talking about. How do you do full screen again? Forget. Green? Oh yeah. So this is a scene from Rise of the Guardians that I did. I only really worked on it for like 6 months because I was like, I'm gonna go to New York, guys. Bye. Oh, where's the? Oh shoot. Sorry. I don't think it's in here. Yeah, it's just that one panel. Okay, let's see. My stuff. So this is a scene where one of the, like a little girl climbs into North, who's Santa Claus, his toy bag, and she ends up at the North Pole, and the Guardians are just like, they've never been around a child before, even though they're like, you know, civil servants to children, and they're all like freaking out. Oh, why isn't this? Am I doing this wrong? Oh, you know what? Let's just do this. Oh my gosh, why isn't this working, guys? Into the preview? Oh God, where's the preview though? Where is it?
Yeah.
I'm so old. Wait.
It's the one that's already open.
Oh, I could just drag it in here?
Yeah.
Oh, really? No way. Oh, really? It's gonna be a while. It's like 400 panels. Oh, I can take another question though.
Oh, it crashed.
Oh, it did? Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I'll have it up for you guys if anybody wants to see it. Yes.
Do you have any tips on how you like run out of shot selection? I mean, I know that you're not supposed to like format.
Yes, you should not.
Where you're sitting there, you're like, oh, what else am I supposed to do to this? You know what?
Why do you think you get to that point? Like,
I guess it's a block.
it really depends on what. Can you give me like? Do you find that in like? I find that I get that in like when I'm boarding action, because.
Yeah, whenever it comes up, I'm just wondering how to treat that or how to go about it. Take a break. Yeah, if it can happen.
One thing you can do is like, I mean that's kind of a problem if you do depth there. It's either you should figure out, you could try moving your characters around, you know? I think a lot of times that could happen is if when you're boarding like a conversation scene, and those are, for the record, they're the hardest things to board. And when I look at a portfolio, and if I'm trying to determine whether somebody can storyboard, is if a person can board a 2-person conversation. That tells me everything about a person, just from that, because it is hard to board. Because how do you make 2 people talking interesting for like 100 panels or 200 panels? So a lot of times you could just try moving your characters if they're walking around or they're doing some kind of business, or you could add in acting that's more, you know, that has more movement. You know, if I need to put in like a sexy shot or something, I'll throw something in the foreground, or like, but you never want to just throw in a shot for the sake of throwing in a shot. You know, a lot of times when I'm boarding and I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, now I have to draw this shot, and I'm like, I don't know how to draw the hand like this or whatever, and then I sit back and I'm like, do I need this shot? And then I'm like, nope. And so I find that there's a lot of cases like shots that are too hard to draw, you actually don't need them. It's really true. Like, and it happens a lot of times for me, and I'm just like, wow, like why did I even fuss over this for like an hour? Like I don't even need this shot. Or you find ways to like not do that shot and do it in a different way. And those are the type of like problem solving things that you kind of get crafty with, you know? But if you're stuck, I would just say like sit down and just do like silhouette compositions just to figure out like, okay, what would be a cool setup for like these 2 characters to talk, you know? Is there something like cool in the middle and like, between them? Or like, is there like, I don't know, like a bush or a tree that they need to talk around, or something that can add to the story, but also keep it interesting? Yes?
Yeah, the character and character moments that you're talking about.
Yes.
That's very fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Could you give me an example? Like, I thought of C-3PO and R2-D2 in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, you know, having a lover's spat.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's kind of.
Yes.
Is that what we're doing? Is that what the concept is trying to convey?
Yeah. I guess the most recent one that I can think of is in Fleabag. I don't know. I don't want to ruin it for people, but oh, okay. I mean, I don't know if this is I don't think it ruins it, but there's I don't know. Classic? Oh, okay. Let me see. I know, because you mentioned Star Wars. Okay, let me just think of a Star Wars thing. Oh, I mean, classic. You know, Leia saying "I love you" and he's saying "I know." Like, you know that he would never say "I love you," and you know, Harrison Ford was like, I mean, what I know from that story is it said "I love you" in the script, and Harrison Ford was like, I'm not going to say that. Like, Han would never say that, and so he didn't say it. And that's like one of the biggest moments that we remember from that trilogy, right? So that's a character moment. And he will never say it. We'll never hear him say it. Okay. Anyway. So sad. Okay, we need one more question because that's like, we're not going to end on Han Solo dying. Yes. Yes.
When you say that you're trying to develop these characters for a smooth film,
Mm-hmm.
what are you doing as someone who has like a board background to help develop them?
Well, this is a new term that studios use where they're like, oh, you should use your superpower. I'm like, what, my superpower? And they're like, well, you're a director who storyboards, so you should use your superpower. I'm like, okay, so you just want me to board something. Okay. So that's literally what I'm doing. Like I'm boarding, so far I've boarded the intro of the movie. So like maybe like 2 sequences in the beginning. And I'm doing a character moment right now where I just want to see a bunch of girls eat in a movie. And so that's what I'm doing right now. And, you know, I just think that's Like when people are eating is when like your realness comes out. Like when I eat with my girlfriends, like we eat and we fight. So I'm picking moments like that can depict as much character as possible. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
What's your favorite moment of track 4?
This is a moment that never happened, but I have two. But one is, so I boarded that scene where he runs up to the tower and she's not there, right? And he sits down and I think he takes out the doll that his kid had, and he's sitting on the chair, on the sofa, on the bed, and then we cut to just this wide shot of him sitting at the bed, and the director Mike Mitchell was like, he should just let out a sad fart. And we were like, oh my gosh. But I mean, no one ever did it. We never even like did it as a joke or drew it as a joke. But if that happened, that would have been the best moment. Yeah. But the I also boarded that scene where like Shaq and Fiona are fighting, and then it gets like kind of steamy and they're like all into each other. And the first time that was cut, it was to the Bon Iver song. I forget what it's called, but it was like amazing, and people are like, "Oh my god, we love this song!" And then he wouldn't sell it to us, so we were like, they tried like 3 other screenings with a different song. They even had a composer come in and do something similar, but it will never be the same scene because that song we couldn't get the rights to that song. So yes, but if we did, that would have been the best moment. Yes.
So how important is music when you're boarding?
When you're boarding?
Yeah.
I'm not a musician, so like I don't really, unless it's like a musical number. Like the movie I'm working on is a musical, so I am working with music in mind, but usually I don't, unless the scene had music and I knew that from the beginning. Yeah. But I listen to music every time I board because I'll get bored. Yes.
So what are the biggest mistakes you see in student portfolios?
So that's the one I mentioned to you, is just not having the processing moment with the character. Another one, and Rad and I talk about this all the time, is like, oh my God, why does this happen? So if like a bunch of characters are together and maybe like there's a fight and you're looking for an escape, and I look and I see like a door, or I see like a rock that I'm gonna use. The next shot I wanna see is, what am I seeing? Like, what is this character seeing? And sometimes we get like just a reverse shot, like a over the shoulder shot of the object of like the rock with me in the background. And I'm like, I don't wanna be here. Like I wanna see just the thing. Like I wanna see the door or the rock. And then the next shot I never get is back on me going, aha, I see it. Just the reaction shot of like, okay, I see this and I register on my face. A lot of times I get like, if you cut to the rock, I just get a hand and then grabbing the rock. It's like, no, I want to see me knowing like the rock is there. And then I go see it. So like, there's all these like levels of thought process that don't really exist in a lot of boards. And that's the stuff that I just miss, because then I'm like, I'm no longer with the character, right? Like I'm no longer feeling like or registering, okay, this character is going to use this rock for something to fight these guys, or like I see this door and I'm going to use this door to get out. Like the thought process is broken.
Yeah, so it's like the panels are just like trying to show it to the audience.
Yes.
But they're forgetting that the audience is the character.
Yes, exactly. You should be up here. Yes.
When the editor gets all the boards and puts the animatics together, has it ever happened where the editor actually takes a board out and doesn't put in the animatic because it's not essential to the narrative that you see in our story?
One feature that would never happen unless the director said, let's take these out. The editor, even the main editor, the main editor is not the director. you know? So that will happen once the director goes in and says, okay, I think we should take this out. But I've never seen that happen. And I personally wouldn't want to work with an editor who does that. Yeah.
So the editor keeps everything.
Yeah. Or they'll have a discussion before. Like a lot of times, actually most times when you send something to editorial, you have an editorial pitch. So all of the editorial team is there. And you'll just, if the editor feels like, oh, I don't think we need that, then they'll have the discussion before it goes into edit, and then they'll just omit it before it gets cut. But that would never happen. I mean, it can, but it wouldn't be like, oh, I took it out because it didn't make sense. It would be more of like, I did another cut where we could take this out, kind of a discussion. Yeah. But it also just depends on the relationship with the editor and the director.
Like you said, being part of the production.
Being part of the, sorry?
Well, I agree with you. It's like what you said, it's being part of the production.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. You're welcome. Cool. Well, thank you for coming, everyone.